Welcome everyone to this, welcome to this introductory video to working ceremonially with the sacred hoop of stars as a way to get our own connection to this really significant, important part of the sky. I am Cayelin Castell, and I'm delighted to introduce you to Jeffery Grundtner, a classically initiated shaman, having survived a near-death experience at the age of 11. And that has informed his and guided his work with the earth and the sky ever since. So Jeffery, so exciting to have you here.
Yeah, well, thank you. Welcome and hello, everyone. This is a really exciting opportunity to talk about the ways that I've worked with the sacred hoop, especially recently. And I do a lot of work with ceremony, and what I want to do is just to start with, well, what is the sacred hoop? When we talk about that, it is what the Lakota people called the circle of stars that contains Orion within it, and includes the Pleiades on the west end and the twins on the east end, and then a series of other stars that form a big circle in the sky. And before I continue, I do want to say that we're looking at this, and for people to know that 35 years ago I was adopted into the Dakota Lakota tradition, and I have gone through all of the protocols. I was given a pipe by a medicine man, and I do ceremony in that way, as well as ceremonies that are specifically designed. They work somewhat outside that tradition and so on. So the traditional ceremonies, but also these other these other ceremonies that are created, often specific, and most often timed in conjunction with things that are going on in the sky, and also most often timed with places, or excuse me, not timed, but done in places on the earth that have significance. Although you can work with these timings anywhere on the earth, and you can create your own sacred space in any place. So having said that, it's important to understand that what I've learned about the sacred hoop and the Lakota star knowledge, I only got a very little bit directly from the oral tradition. Most of what I've learned has come from a book that was published through Sinte Galeska College in Pine Ridge, called Lakota Star Knowledge, and they interviewed many dozens of elders, and then they put this information together. And one thing really to understand that I definitely want to include here before we continue is that when we're looking at this from this perspective and referencing the Lakota, we're talking about their sacred scripture. Their understanding of who they were spiritually and living their life was written in the sky and on the land. And it informed them about, from an outside perspective, we may think, oh, well, when the sun was in this place in the sky, then that's when they did this ceremony. But it was much more than that. And that's kind of the introduction that I want to offer to this whole thing, is that a big lesson about this is that to be able to live in the mystery and the magic of when you are connecting that earth and sky realm, that these are not separate things, and they inform us in a deep way that words don't always do it justice. We can get a sense of it, but when you experience it and when you do it, is when this insight, this deep understanding and wisdom and knowledge of a place, as well as the connection to the sky, comes forth. So But back to the idea of the Lakota sacred hoop, we're talking about their sacred scriptures, like we would talk about the Torah or the Bible or any other, sacred text. But it's dynamic. It's in the land. It's in the sky. And so, to some degree, that is very specific for the Lakota. And we're not going to talk a great deal about that, although it informed me in terms of how I would engage with it. When recently I just really felt compelled, as I was observing Mars very tightly conjunct the Pleiades, which is what we consider at the western gate of this sacred hoop or medicine wheel in the sky. And that I wanted to work with it ceremonially. So that was a model based upon my knowledge and my working within that tradition. But we want to be able to generalize it so other people can utilize this, because this is such an important part of the sky, and other traditions have recognized that circle of stars and the stars within it. Like I said, it contains Orion, which is one of the most identifiable constellations to many people. So why don't we just kind of, Cayelin, just briefly put up your graphics so that we can kind of show them how it creates a medicine wheel in the sky. And so there's all of these stars that are identified in the fine print. These are all bright stars, and when you're able to see the whole thing, which is generally in the winter, you can see that there is a big circle with all of these other constellations contained within it. The other piece to understand is Lakota, obviously they would see constellations that related to their experience of life. Sometimes it is very interesting of how some of those things are similar to the stories and the myths that were passed down to us through our Western tradition, Sumerian, Babylonian, Greek, etc. Nevertheless, what we're doing here is to offer to people a way to work with this, with the awareness that there's only a little bit of established astrology. What I think is sort of key to this idea is that we see a medicine wheel, which, if you look at that in the corner, it contains that symbol that we use for the earth, the circle of the earth with the 4 directions on it, and how that relates to the sky with the, again, another reference to the Lakota. These were places around the Black Hills that were sacred to them, and they would do ceremonies depending on where specifically the sun was. So when we're looking at other planets, I don't know if there was a native tradition of observing the other planets crossing that. So that part is new. But, for me, and what we will do in maybe a longer video is describe my journey with observing Mars and how in the last 3 months, and this is, we're doing this in early June 2021. In the last 3 months, Mars has crossed that region of the sky, and it left in the eastern gate, as we would call it, the eastern door, which is the twins, and on about the 31st. And interestingly, Venus had already entered because she was with the Pleiades, I believe, around would it be the 1st or the 8th, something like that, of May.
I think maybe it was considered Gemini. So the 1st and the 2nd and the 3rd would have been right there with the Pleiades.
Yeah, and then I think on the 31st, 1st or 2nd of June, she was already at the center. Now, Cayelin, do you want to describe a little bit about what creates that cross in the middle
Yes.
that again, the Lakota saw, but Cayelin has additional knowledge of what that means, why it's such an important point.
So we have the plane of the galaxy, and this is actually the Milky Way band that comes through this circle of stars. And it's not as dark as it is at the other part of the sky where it's near galactic center. This is where we're looking out past the edge of our galaxy. So the band is not quite as dark, but it's still visible, and it's under a dark sky, and it's pretty amazing to see. And then this green band that we're seeing is the path of the planets, also known as the plane of the solar system. So where these two planes are intersecting forms a cross. It's called the galactic cross. And you'll see the sun here at the June solstice. So currently this point, based on not constellations, but based on the seasonal signs, the June solstice, 0 Cancer point, the sun is rising right here on this at the center of the cross, making this a really significant time to be tuning into this and to be getting this information. So delighted that you're sharing this with us, Jeffrey.
Yeah. So that's it. I mean, we'd love to show you some pictures of the actual sky, which we will at a later date, but this is a good, intro to that, to show you where these things are. And it is also, it is important to be able to go out and to witness them as often as you can, and actually do the ceremonial piece, whether it's a meditation or doing an intention for some other greater thing. In my case, I was doing a lot around the renewal of the masculine spirit with working with Mars, but the moon passes through this region every month because she moves very fast and moves through that area. The sun once a year, and it was the sun movement through there that informed the Lakota, as I said. But so what are ways that you could work with this? So there's the idea that these prominent stars form this circle, and that we have this cross, which is the medicine wheel. And this is, especially for people who already work with a medicine wheel, or, so many people these days are at least aware of the directions and what that really means. And I think, I don't know, this is supposed to be an intro, but I'll say this anyway. There's a quick thing to say about that, is that there are the directions which relate to knowable things here on the earth. The West, in what comes out of the West, etc., and the North, and we relate these things to, depending on your tradition, to some specific things. And then there's above, a below, and a center. And the medicine wheel just simply represents on the earth. It does represent that three-dimensional thing in 2 dimensions. The above and below is sort of implied, but it connects to the idea of spirit arriving in form, manifest on the earth. So that's a key piece too, to remember that this is a symbol of arriving here in form. And when you have a circle, and you have the lines crossing, where those lines cross, it represents dimensional shifts, which in fact creates a vortex. But if you think about 4 directions, above, below, and a center, those are 7 aspects, 7 points of projections, or 7 dimensions. If you want to take it out of an indigenous understanding, they understand it as the 7 powers of the universe. So they know it's 7 dimensions. Even if they're referencing, the West, from the West is facing the dark, the sun setting, and the unknown, and facing transformation. So when a planet or the sun enters the West door, that's perhaps a piece to be aware of. You're entering a circle that you're eventually going to arrive at the cross, which is a vortex that connects you to interdimensional space. But as you're transiting this space, you've entered it by going through the west door, the setting sun, facing the unknown, being ready for transformation. And then when you reach that center point, there's this a very strong point of inspiration. And as Cayelin just explained, where the place in our it only happens every 26,000 years that the summer solstice, that the sun arrives at that place at this time. So that's just part of this grander significance. Nevertheless, we need to think about that. So whatever planetary energy may be transiting that, in this case, Mars, there may be a lot more download at those moments. And then leaving the Eastern Gate, it's like leaving brand new and entering the ordinary life again, if you will. Some of these things take, quite a bit of time. With the sun, it's a month and a half. With Mars, it was 3 months. Venus, I don't remember exactly. It's a little bit shorter than that, but at any rate. So what are the ways to, if you just work with those 3 points, that's powerful. You could also work with the connections to the other prominent stars that are there, as well as the interactions that may go on between the planets and the archetypes they represent. While Mars was transiting that, Venus was in the underworld. She wasn't visible. She was so close to the sun at that time. And so there were ways that those two things, Mars was going through it, well, we could say a conscious underworld from the standpoint entering the ceremonial space, entering the circle, knowing that they're going to arrive at what would be the 0 point of Cancer, will tell you when you're on that galactic cross. And then when it reaches about 23 Cancer, that you're leaving the sacred hoop, that it's leaving the sacred hoop. And that, in my case, I got a lot of profound insights from it. I did try to generalize it and see, well, was that happening in the outer world? Maybe, but this is as much an exploration and it's a pattern to explore and work with. And I'm happy to introduce that to people. And like I said, at a later date, we'll see kind of what came about as discoveries working with Mars.
So, Jeffrey, can you give us just a simple example of how people could work with this without all the, just not really knowing much more than what's been shared here? For me, I often know that just going out and witnessing these things is powerful. But is there just some kind of simple intention ceremony, whatever, that people could do?
Well, so as a planet enters the Western Gate, the thing that I would suggest is that the idea of you're separating there's some aspect of yourself that you want to separate from ordinary reality in order to go through transformation. And so however you would want to symbolize that, if it is a sense of, again, I'm going to go ahead and use the aspects of Mars. In this case, some of the things that were going on is that in my case, so this is very specific to me, I was helping an old warrior, he was a veteran. He was getting ready for his death process. As I was witnessing Mars reaching that, and his stories and his connections and stuff made it very clear to me that, well, okay, here is, in some respects, there was a way in which this, he was symbolizing this for me. And so that warrior, the Martian elements that were warrior in a different way, was I ready and willing to let that die and enter the unknown? And so I did ceremony around that. And, I did it with a group of men. Actually, it was men and women. I didn't exclude women at all because that Mars lives within all of us. And yeah, so I don't know if that.
What I'm getting, what you're saying, and I think this is maybe what would be helpful and where we can maybe wrap this up, is to say that pay attention to what's going on around you, because that's a message about what it is that you're perhaps getting ready to let go of or die to as you go through this time, right? Working with the sacred group. And so it's going to be different for different people. I love your example because I think that's powerful. And that, so it's about paying attention and then putting our intention into it by just seeing what it is that we're letting go of. And I find it fascinating that we're just at a time when we're really completing with a whole entire 26,000 year cycle. And we're dreaming into the new 26,000 year cycle. So this is brilliant. Like, oh my gosh, we need to let go of all the things from the previous cycle that we don't want to take with us into the next cycle. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there's, but there's also the elements of the things that we do want to, because we have to understand too, that a life, and again, that old veteran is a good example. He had a great deal of wisdom and experience to pass on, and heart. And so, those were important elements that, what will you take with you? And when you're entering a ceremonial space, again, using the Dakota Lakota tradition, I view it as like, well, entering the Sundance space, you have certain things that are connecting you to, what is the prayer you're carrying in for? That is your way to serve life. What are you doing this kind of sacrifice, these 4 days of fasting and dancing, that to help bring you closer to spirit? And that center point was in the case of the Sundance Arena, is the tree of life, So it's that, and that center point, again, the intention might be, okay, Spirit, I gave this up. Show me, or show me what I've understood now up to this point, whether it's right or not. But it's a bit of a surrender. It's I think, at the center point. And at the beginning, when you leave that, it's like, okay, now I'm entering back into a new reality. And so, yes, indeed, what is it that's around me that is showing me, that's giving me clues to how to move forward? So that's
beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your brilliance and your wisdom. And we definitely will do a follow-up to this that will keep people posted on. So
all right. Thank you, Cayelin.
Bye.